I have a crazy story for you. We've got to talk about how in poker, the blind squirrel finds the nuts. Okay, so about 8 years ago, I'm playing at a WSOP circuit event in North Carolina. And there were two experiences I had at this circuit that absolutely blew my mind. The first was sitting at a table with a successful player, had won a couple rings, travels the circuit, and he absolutely lost his mind on a dealer because the level had just changed. We'd moved up in stakes and the dealer was still dealing out the blue deck. Now, what had happened is the dealer had already done the first riffle on the blue deck when the level had changed. Therefore, the blue deck was the deck that we were going to play for one more hand. Then we were going to switch to the red deck. But this player who had won multiple rings, who was a winning player, who traveled the circuit, was so pissed off because he had been cold decked and he thought that switching to the red deck would give him a better chance of getting a good hand, that he was furious and coming unglued on the dealer because we had to play one more hand with the blue deck. How could a successful player be so superstitious? My name's Rob Gardner. I'm a 20-year poker professional and coach. And today we are going to talk about the blindly aggressive players in poker and how they find success and what we can learn from them. Now, obviously, the odds of getting a winning hand or a successful hand or pocket aces do not change between the blue deck and the red deck. And if you think for some reason it does, you need to go do some research because it really doesn't have an impact. And as crazy as that story sounds, it wasn't 4 hours later in that tournament. I was at the table with two circuit grinders who had a combined 9 rings between them. And they were steaming mad about a situation in the tournament. Having recently got to the table and listening to them just chew apart the tournament staff, I politely asked what they were so upset about. And this is what I was told. The circuit at this stop had recently switched to a format where they extended play for an extra 2 levels on day 1. This allows players to potentially cash, make the money, not bag, and then get to play another flight, which puts more money in the prize pool. It gives players an opportunity to take additional shots at a big stack on day 2. It makes the casino more money. So surely these guys were upset because they had to play an extra 2 levels and day 1 was really long and they were tired. No, that wasn't the issue. The issue was because there was an extra hour of play, if they were both cold decked, they would have to do an extra hour of being cold decked, whereas normally the day would end and they would get a new dealer and a new set of cards and a new opportunity to get better starting hands. So it was causing them to lose more of their chips heading into day 2 because now they had this extra hour of being cold decked and they could not get a fresh start. I so badly, especially at a younger age, wanted to correct these guys on how probability works, but I just kept my mouth shut. But again, I remember walking away from that going, how the hell are people this superstitious making a living at this game? And there's a very, very clear answer that became very obvious to me as I played more at these circuits and I traveled more. And that's that we still live in an era where blind aggression is a profitable strategy. You see, the way most of these circuit grinders would play is they were very, very aggressive players. They loved to triple barrel. They loved to use big sizings. They loved to bet scare cards. And versus the typical field at a lot of these weaker circuit events, players would vastly overfold. So while these players had superstitions and really bad opening ranges and didn't understand pot ads or a lot of the mechanics, they were able to overcome those deficiencies just by playing aggressive and picking up lots of fold equity along the way. Now, obviously the game has changed over the last 8 years and fold equity is not quite what it used to be, but there still is a lot of fold equity to be had out there. And there still is examples of poker players who are finding success just from running over tournaments, even though they don't have the full skill set you need to be successful. And when you see that, you should pay attention because it means even though they're not doing everything right, and there's some things they're doing that might be really, really bad, there is something we can learn from their success and apply to our game to get better ourselves. So what are you saying, Rob? Should we just approach poker with a blindly aggressive slate? Should we just go to circuit events and just start triple barreling off our life left and right and betting every scare card and using huge sizings? No, I'm not suggesting that. While that style can be successful, it is wildly variant and it usually requires many, many bullets into all of your tournaments because you're going to go on really huge swings. But I do believe there's a couple things that we can learn and try to apply to make ourselves more aggressive. So here are 3 areas I want to encourage you to grow in 2025 in your aggression. The first one, and this is the most important one for my tournament players out there, grow in your aggression late in tournaments. For whatever reason, poker players seem to have things backwards. They play really aggressive in the early and mid stages of tournaments where it's not super beneficial to do so and we're very deep stacked. And then they get to the late stage of tournaments where they start to get shallow and they get really tight and they play very conservative. Where what they should be doing is playing tight and conservative when they're really deep stacked and playing very aggressive in the late stage of tournaments. If your plan for winning a poker tournament is getting aces and kings and ace king left and right in the final 2 tables, good freaking luck. It's hard enough to get deep in tournaments, and then on top of that, to expect to get a sun run of cards. Oh, and then by the way, actually win and hold with those hands. Those of you guys that have had your aces cracked, it's not a viable strategy for success. You won't find a stage of the tournament with more fold equity than on the money bubble, than on the final table bubble, than when the pay jumps get big. Getting really good at being aggressive in those spots will have a massive impact on your win rate. And what's really cool is as you start to practice being aggressive late in tournaments, you start to find all of these spots where people are way over folding to the point where sometimes your cards really don't matter. Doesn't mean you want to just start 3-betting people left and right with any 2 cards, but it does allow us to get a little bit more out of line and a little bit more comfortable with the types of hands we can be aggressive with. And the more hands we can be aggressive with, the less strong we need our hands to be, which reduces our variance because we don't need to wait for aces and ace king and kings and queens to be successful. Now a hand like ace 5 off can be a great 3-bet bluff that we can get our opponents to vastly overfold with, and we can be more consistent in the late stages of tournaments, which leads to more profit or success. A second place we can ramp up our aggression is on the river. Think about it. When is the pot biggest in poker? On the river. That's when the pot is always biggest. So when you have a better and more successful strategy for river play, that's one of the places you can increase your win rate the most. And also, surprisingly, because the pot's biggest, it's one of the places we can find the most fold equity. One obvious reason why we can find great fold equity on the river is because this is where draws die. Flush draws and straight draws and people who play bottom pair to try and hit 2 pair and trips. They get to the river, they miss their hand, and then they just give up. This can allow us to clean up a lot of equity, even with some of our really bad hands when we make a small bet and they just auto fold. There are still a lot of players in 2025 who will auto fold rivers, even to smaller sizings. Learning the nuances of when we can do this and which players give up on the river very easily can really allow us to add some win rate to our play just by having some more aggression on rivers. It's very common for me to see players who are willing to bet on flop and willing to bet on turn, and then their river bet percentage is so incredibly low. Now, I don't have enough time in this video to talk about which hands we should turn into river bluffs and which hands we don't, but this is obviously a topic you can put some time and energy into 2025 and see a significant increase in your win rate. The third place where you can really work on your aggression is in your opening ranges. Now, nobody wants to study ranges, and a lot of players think that they've got their ranges mastered, and yet you'll pull up their HUD and you'll go through a database run and you'll very quickly find that they're only opening 35% of hands from the button, or they're only 3-betting 5 to 6% of the time. Now, this isn't always a lack of knowledge, it's actually a lack of follow through. Because while players may know that they're supposed to open a certain hand, or they know they're supposed to 3-bet a certain hand, they don't feel comfortable doing so, or their autopilot kicks in and they start to just forget about these class of hands and they let that aggression subside. And the problem is, as that aggression subsides, so does their win rate. The less hands you play, the less you can win. And while that doesn't mean we want to play any 2 cards, we have to be smart and balance that. The overwhelming amount of players that I coach and run into are playing too few hands, not too many. This is especially true on the button, which is the most profitable position in poker. So if you don't study anything else in 2025, study your button opening ranges and your button 3-bet ranges, and even just implementing that in your game can have a significant impact on your win rate. Honestly, if you look at some of the best high stakes players in the game, And you look at some of these sickos that are playing Triton events and 100K high rollers, even those players are not pure GTO players. They are very, very loose aggressive players that have really learned and mastered when to open up the playbook and when to open up their aggression and go beyond GTO's aggression to maximize a little bit more fold equity when they're up against weaker opponents. They aren't recklessly aggressive players, but they know when to turn up the stakes and when to apply the pressure. So if there are blind squirrels out there finding nuts by being recklessly aggressive in tournaments, what can we accomplish if we really put some time and effort into studying our aggression games? Drop a line in the comments. Tell us what you think about this video, what you think about aggression. What are some ways that you can get more aggressive in 2025? And as always, hit that subscribe button below and the like button to support this channel so we can continue putting out videos twice a week for you to help you get more out of the game and enjoy the game. That's it for me, Rob Gardner. Until next time, keep playing aggressive.